All right, so today we're going to go ahead and start off with our topic of gas exchange, right? All right, so what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about how the respiratory system is actually going to be working. Now, when we talk about our gas exchange system, right? Our gas exchange system is, hold on one second. Our gas exchange system is really, really good at its job, right? I mean, you know that it is really, really good at its job. What are the different features, right? What are the different features that we see? What are the different features that are actually shown to us by our are actually shown to us by our gas exchange system that allows it to do its job so well, right? What are the different features it has that allow it to do its job so well? So, when we talk about the different features that a gas exchange system has, right? So, first of all, if you're going to talk about it, a gas exchange system is adapted to provide you clean air and warm air, right? Our gas exchange system, if we talk about it, our gas exchange system is adapted to providing clean and warm air. So that's the first thing it does. It's going to make sure that the air you're getting, breathing in, is clear and warm. Then it also maximizes, right? It also maximizes the surface area for diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it will make sure that the maximum surface area possible for diffusion and carbon dioxide, of oxygen carbon dioxide, is there. It also minimizes the distance for this diffusion. So it's going to make sure that the distance that the carbon dioxide and oxygen molecules have to cover as they're diffusing across, that distance is also as small as possible. And it also maintains the concentration gradient. It also maintains the concentration gradient. It makes sure that within the lungs, we always have high concentration, and outside the lungs or in the blood system, we always have low concentration. So the rate of diffusion is also very fast. The rate of diffusion also takes place very, very quickly. Now, before we talk about how exactly our gas exchange system does all of these things, we first need to talk about what? We need to talk about our gas exchange system. We first need to talk about how our lungs are, how do they look like, how do they work. Okay. Now, this is a diagram of lungs that we have in front of us. Okay. Now, if I take a look at this diagrams, a diagram of the lung, so let's go over all of the features one by one. Okay. First of all, what are these white uh, rings that we can see? These white rings that we can see are the ribs. Okay, so this is like someone has cut a cross section. Like I've taken the patient and I have cut through them. I have sliced through them. So you can actually see the ribs. This is the cross section of the ribs. So the white area is the ribs. Now, between the ribs, we have a muscle. The muscle we have between the ribs is the muscle that we call as our intercostal muscle. So we have our ribs and then we have our this muscle over here. This muscle is the intercostal muscle. Inter means between and costal is the medical term that we use for ribs. Okay. So intercostal, between the ribs, we have our muscles. They are known as intercostal muscle. Intercostal muscle can be of two types. We can have external intercostal muscle and internal intercostal muscle. What is the difference? The external intercostal muscles are located on the outside, right? While the internal intercostal muscles will be located towards the inside. Now, so the ribs are the ones that are going to be surrounding the lungs. Now, you can see that the ribs, they are surrounding the lungs and they basically make it this cavity. They make a cavity, they make a space, right? Where the lungs are present and where the heart is present. This space or the cavity in which my lungs and my heart is located and in which is being surrounded by the ribs and the muscle, this cavity, this compartment, right? This cavity, this compartment, this area, we call it pleural cavity. This entire thing is known as our pleural cavity. So our lungs are found in the pleural cavity. Now, the entire cavity is surrounded by a lining. The entire cavity is surrounded by a lining. Okay? That lining is covering the entire cavity, the walls of the cavity. So, for example, if I draw this for you, all of this basically, all of this. This that I'm drawing for you, this is all. See how it's surrounding the entire wall of the cavity. It's lining. It is covering the entire wall of the cavity. Even going onto the lungs. It's covering the entire lining of the cavity, the entire lining of the compartment. It's covering the entire walls of the compartment. So this lining or this lining that covers the wall of the entire cavity, this lining is known as pleural membrane. Okay, so the cavity is pleural cavity and the membrane that is surrounding it is known as pleural membrane. All right. Now, inside this cavity, we also have a fluid. That fluid is known as pleural fluid. So the cavity is pleural cavity, the lining is pleural membrane, and the fluid inside of it is going to be pleural fluid. Now, the cavity is surrounded by the ribs and the intercostal muscles. At the bottom of the cavity, we will have our diaphragm. At the bottom of the cavity, we're going to have our diaphragm, right? Now, what actually happens inside the cavity? So over here, if we go back to taking a look at our over here at the nose, right? This is our nose and this is the oral cavity. This is the nasal cavity and this is the oral cavity. You can see that both the oral cavity and the nasal cavity are technically connected to each other, right? The nasal cavity and the oral cavity are connected to each other. This area where the nasal cavity and the oral cavity are connected to each other, this area is basically known as your pharynx. All right. Now, after this, the oral cavity continues on to give you the esophagus. The nasal cavity continues on to give you your respiratory system. Over here, if you remember, we have an epiglottis. That epiglottis can flap. That epiglottis can, whenever we are swallowing, that epiglottis will close on top of the trachea to make sure that the food passes onto the esophagus and doesn't accidentally enter the respiratory system. Now, below the pharynx, we have the area where the vocal cords are located. So the area where the vocal cords are located, that area is known as larynx. Okay. Now, the nasal cavity continues to give us our trachea. Okay. It continues to give us our trachea. When we are going to talk about trachea, what is trachea? Okay. Trachea is made up of, is basically your tube that connects the nasal cavity to the lungs. The tube is made up of cartilage. The cartilage has a very special arrangement. The cartilage in the trachea, especially, is arranged in C-shaped rings. So, in the trachea is made up of cartilage, and that cartilage is arranged in C-shaped rings, right? Like this. So, you have these C-shaped rings that are all arranged one on top of the other to make a tube, to make our trachea, basically, right? This is how the trachea is actually made due to the arrangement of these C-shaped rings. So the trachea is made up of cartilage. Okay. Then after that, the trachea is going to continue and divide into two branches. The two branches that are known as bronchus. So trachea is the biggest, and then we have two branches. The two branches are known as bronchus. Bronchus, we have left bronchus and we have right bronchus. Okay. The left bronchus is the bronchus, the branch of trachea that is supplying the left lung. And the branch of trachea that is supplying the right lung, that one is known as right bronchus. So we have our trachea. Our trachea is the largest. Then the trachea will divide to give us our bronchus. We can have left bronchus and right bronchus. One branch will go to each lung. After that, my bronchus will continue dividing into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller tubes, right? Those smaller tubes are known as bronchioles. So we will have our trachea. The trachea will divide to give us two branches, which are bronchus, and the bronchus will continue dividing into multiple small branches that we call our bronchioles, right? Now, all of these are made up of cartilage, all of them, okay? So, why is cartilage so important? The reason cartilage is so important, and you need to know this reason, is that it prevents collapse of the windpipe. It prevents the windpipe from collapsing because what is happening that breathing in and breathing out is all about pressure change, right? It's all about pressure change. It's about I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. There's lots of pressure change happening inside the lungs. So we want to prevent collapse or bursting. We also don't want it to burst. If I'm breathing in too much air, I don't want my trachea to burst because of high pressure of the air. So the cartilage will prevent it from collapsing. It will prevent it from bursting, right? It will keep the airway open. It will make sure that the airway always stays open, right? So this is what we are going to end up seeing. Now, if we are going to continue talking about it, one second. Now, if we are going to continue talking about it, hold on, let me show you a diagram. One second. Right, take a look at this. Now, what happens that I told you that uh, uh your um your trachea, right? Trachea will divide to give you what? Trachea will divide to give you your bronchus. Bronchus will divide to give you your bronchioles. We call them respiratory bronchioles. Now, respiratory bronchioles will continue to divide to give you even smaller branches. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is not respiratory bronchiole. We simply call them bronchioles. Okay. Now, what's going to happen that the bronchioles are going to keep on dividing into even smaller bronchioles. Those smaller bronchioles are known as terminal bronchioles. So what do we have? We have trachea, the biggest, then two branches that are left and right bronchus. Then we have bronchioles, which are branches of the bronchus. Okay. Then the bronchioles will divide into different smaller branches that we call terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles will then divide into even smaller branches that we call respiratory bronchioles. And finally, the respiratory bronchioles will divide to give us our alveolar duct, and the alveolar duct will eventually give us our alveoli. Right? So this is how the respiratory system is. We have trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, then respiratory bronchiole, and finally we are going to have our alveolar, which will then give us our alveoli. This is the alveoli. You know that alveoli is the major gas exchange system. That is where the gaseous exchange actually is going to be taking place, right? So the major gaseous exchange system that we have is our alveoli. Our alveoli, we will study the structure in detail, but our alveoli basically has these air sacs, right? You can call them air sacs, or they have these um, this globular shape, and they are extensively supplied by blood. They have an extensive network of capillaries. So a huge network of capillaries that is going to be surrounding the alveolus, a huge network of capillaries that is actually going to be found all around our alveolus. And that is going to allow for good exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, when we are going to go ahead and we're going to talk about it, now this table, take a look at this table. And this table shows us about the differences in trachea, bronchus, terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole, alveolar duct, and alveoli. What can we see? Let's go ahead and discuss. What we can see is that we, in our trachea, right, we will have C-shaped cartilage. We will also have goblet cells. Now, I will teach you goblet cells in a bit more detail. But what exactly are goblet cells? Let's take a look. This, what have I put in front of you? What are we seeing right now? We are seeing a microscopic image of what our respiratory epithelium, or the lining of the respiratory tract, looks like. As you can see over here, this is our lining. The lining is basically composed of a type of cell that we basically ciliated cells, right? So these are our ciliated cells because our respiratory tract has cilia on top of it. Why do we need cilia in our respiratory tract? We need cilia in the respiratory tract because we need to move away the mucus, to sweep away the mucus, to take the mucus away from the lungs. We need cilia. You know where the cilia are? You see these small, tiny hair-like projections on the top over here? These small, tiny hair-like projections on top of the cells, these are the cilia. Okay, not this. These are the cells. Over here, on top of the cells, we have these smooth, really small hair-like projections. These are the cilia. So our um, respiratory epithelium is ciliated, right? It is ciliated. It has got cilia on top of it. Along with that, it has certain types of cell that we call goblet cell. Okay. Goblet cells are the cells that are stained pink. So the cells you can see over here that are stained pink in the middle, these are our goblet cells. So goblet cell are responsible for producing what? They're responsible for producing your mucus. Goblet cells will produce the mucus and cilia will sweep it away. So, if we take a look, our cartilage, our trachea will have cartilage inside of it. Our trachea will have goblet cells as well. They will have smooth muscles. Why do we need smooth muscles? To constrict and dilate the respiratory muscles, to open up the respiratory tract, to constrict it, right? We use the term bronchoconstriction or bronchodilation. Just like in heart, we studied vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So constriction means narrowing, dilation means widening, right? Constriction means narrowing and dilation means widening. So we need it for bronchodilation and bronchoconstriction. So if I want to make the bronchus dilated, if I want to make the bronchus constricted, the smooth muscles are what's going to be helping. The trachea also has cilia on it, okay? But it is not a site for gas exchange. No exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen will happen in the trachea. They will happen elsewhere. Okay. After that, we have our bronchus. Bronchus, there are two bronchus when it comes to a number. The bronchus also are made up of cartilage. They also have goblet cells. They also have smooth muscles and they also are ciliated. But when we talk about the terminal bronchioles, right? Terminal bronchioles do not have any cartilage. This is why I'm going over the table because you get questions on this in the exams. Terminal bronchiole does not have any cartilage. Terminal bronchiole also does not have any goblet cells, but it does have smooth muscle. It does have cilia. So it will have smooth muscles and cilia, but no cartilage and no goblet cells. Similarly, respiratory bronchiole also has no cartilage and no goblet cell. Respiratory bronchiole also doesn't have any smooth muscle and has very few cilia. That's it, but it has nothing else. The alveolar duct has no cartilage, no goblet cells, no smooth muscles, no cilia, but gas exchange, the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, can happen through the alveolar duct. And finally, our alveoli. Our alveoli, again, don't have any cartilage or goblet cells or smooth muscles or cilia, but gas exchange takes place inside the alveoli. So we need to remember this. Now, when we go ahead and we are going to talk about it, right? When we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about it. So now we went over. So now let's talk about over here. You and I had discussed about how this is how the gas exchange system works, right? What was the first feature? That it provides us clean and warm air. So we have to talk about how exactly does it provide us with clean and warm air. Now, what actually happens is this, that as the air flows through the nose and the trachea, it is warmed to the body temperature and moisten. So the body, whatever the body's temperature is, what is it? 37 degrees centigrade. So it will warm it to the body's temperature and moisten it by evaporation from the lining. So it will moisten the air by evaporation from the lining of our nasal cavity, right? So our nasal cavity, our nose, is not only going to uh, clean the air, not only is it going to warm the air, but it is also going to moisten it. It's going to add water vapors to it. Why is this so important? The reason it is so important is because if the air that we are breathing in is not moistened by the it's not moistened by the nasal cavity, then if the air is too dry and we breathe it in, it can damage the surfaces of our lung, right? So that's the first thing. We need to make sure that it's warmed and also it is moistened. After that, we need to make sure that all of your uh, dust particles, your sand, your pollen, bacteria, viruses, right? All of these are going to be removed from the air. So you know that in our nasal cavity, the hair in the nasal cavity will remove the dust particles. You can just use the term suspended particles. Any suspended particles like your dust particles, like your pollen, like viruses, like bacteria, all of these are going to be removed by the hair that we have in our nasal cavity, right? Now, after that, our air is going to enter into the tracheus and the bronchi. Okay. In the trachea and the bronchi, goblet cells are present, right? So, goblet cells produce mucus. Now, actually, if we talk about it, each goblet cell produce something known as mucin. Technically, that's the term we use for it, mucus. Mucus and mucin are the same. So they all produce mucin, right? So what happens that the mucin, right? The mucin makes a slimy solution. So the mucin is produced by the goblet cells. That mucin sort of reacts together or joins together to make a slimy solution called mucus. Okay. And what is mucin made up of? What actually is mucin? Mucin is a glycoprotein. What is a glycoprotein? We have studied it before. Glycoproteins are proteins that have a small carbohydrate chain, right? So what's going to happen? This makes the mucus sticky. So it can trap the inhaled particles. So any particle that has managed to escape the hair in the nasal cavity, they will be trapped by the mucus because of the glycoproteins. They make it sticky. So it is going to be able to, um, it is actually going to be able to, trap the inhaled particles. Then the cilia will move the mucus to the top of the trachea towards the esophagus where it is swallowed. So this mucus is actually swallowed by us, right? The cilia will actually beat it up towards the larynx. And when the mucus is going to reach the top of the trachea, it is going to be swallowed. Then, along with all of this, we also have white blood cells. Those white blood cells are also constantly present in our airway. So, if any infection takes place, if any harmful infection takes place, what is going to happen? That the macrophages will, the macrophages, right? The macrophages are going to be there and ready to fight off any infection. Got it? Everything is making sense so far? Anything that you want to ask about what we have discussed so far? Anything that you want to ask?
No.
Okay. Now, when we are going to talk about our alveoli, right? Alveoli have got quite a lot of special features that make it optimum for the job that it does. When we're going to talk about alveoli, so in alveoli, what features does an alveoli have? Let's go ahead and discuss. Alveoli, first of all, the alveolar wall contains elastic fibers. The elastic fibers present in the wall of the alveoli allow it to expand and relax and expand, right? As the air will flow in and the air is going to flow out. Now, the alveoli has a single layer of cells. That's it. A single layer of flattened cells. That is going to be surrounding the entire wall of the alveoli. The entire lining of the alveoli is going to be covered by a flattened layer of cells. Now, this is really important. It will only have one really thin layer of cells. Why? Why does it have such one single really thin layer of cells? The reason it has one really thin layer of cells, thin single layer of cells, is to reduce the diffusion distance. To reduce the distance that carbon dioxide and oxygen need to travel as they go from your capillaries to your veins, right? This is my capillary and this is my vein. Okay. So what's going to happen that my carbon dioxide needs to diffuse out of the capillary and go into the lung, right? And um, the oxygen needs to diffuse into the oxygen needs to diffuse into the blood, right? And carbon dioxide needs to diffuse out of the blood. So because the lining of the alveoli is so thin, so the distance that these molecules have to cover for diffusion, the distance that these molecules have to cover for diffusion is really less. Hence, what is going to happen that diffusion can take place very quickly and very efficiently. Diffusion can take place really fast because they don't have to go through a lot of layers, right? They only have to go through one layer as they go from your one layer is going to be this from the alveoli across the alveoli. Then another layer is going to be across the endothelium of the capillary because capillary also has one single lining of cells, remember? So they will go through one layer of the alveoli, then one layer over here of your endothelium of the capillary, wall of the capillary, and then one layer of the cell membrane as they enter into the red blood cell. Okay. Then another feature that they have is that they are extensively surrounded by what? Network of capillaries. Like they are surrounded by so many capillaries, so many capillaries. Why? To allow for large surface area. When large surface area is going to be available, fast diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide will take place, right? So we want them to have a, a large surface area. That's why alveoli have an elastic fibers. So they can expand to increase the surface area as well, right? So not only, so what are the features? This was the feature that we had studied. It maximizes surface area. So how is the surface area maximized? Due to the shape of the alveoli, the number of alveoli, and also we have so many alveoli, right? And also the extensive capillary network. Okay. Then we will have minimal distance for diffusion. How is the distance minimal? The alveoli is surrounded by single layer of cells. We call these cells squamous cells because they have a flat shape. Okay, so a thin layer of squamous cells. And the capillary also has one single layer of cells. So the distance that the oxygen and carbon dioxide have to travel is really, really small. Now, when we are going to go ahead and talk about it, it also, I had told you, maintains the concentration gradient. So you can ask me, how does it maintain the concentration gradient? How is the concentration gradient actually maintained? This is because of the extensive capillary network, which makes sure that blood is constantly moving, right? So the moment the blood is going to get oxygenated, it will move on. The moment the blood is oxygenated, it will move on. It won't stay over there. It will move on. It will instantly be replaced by deoxygenated blood. The moment the oxygen will move from the alveoli into the blood, into the red blood cell, it will move on. It won't stay over there. It will flow on. So it's going to be replaced by deoxygenated blood. As a result, what is going to happen? That the concentration of oxygen in the capillaries remains low. The oxygen of the concentration of oxygen in the capillary remains low, right? It will stay low. Why is it going to stay low? It's going to stay low because the blood is constantly flowing. So the moment the hemoglobin will become saturated with oxygen, it will move on. Because of this, the concentration of oxygen in the blood stays low and the concentration of carbon dioxide stays high. So the difference in oxygen and carbon dioxide level between the alveoli and the blood vessels is maintained. So the oxygen will keep on diffusing outside and the carbon dioxide is going to keep on diffusing inside. So these are the features of the alveoli that allow the gas exchange system to be adapted to doing all of the four features that we had studied before, right? So this is how our system actually works. This is how our system actually works. Now, we also have to, I'm just going over with you, um, just going over with you about your exhalation and inhalation. Okay, this is something that you had studied in IGCSE. I'm just revising it with you right now. It's not technically a part of AS level, but since this is something that you studied in IGCSE, so I just want to revise with you. Okay. So what happens whenever we breathe in? Whenever we breathe in, what is going to happen? That your external intercostal muscles will contract and the internal intercostal muscles will relax. So the external intercostal muscles will contract, internal intercostal muscles will relax. So what is going to be the result? The result is going to be that the rib cage is going to move up and out. It's going to move upwards and upwards. At the same time, the diaphragm is going to contract. The diaphragm is going to contract and it's going to flatten. This is going to increase the volume inside the chest cavity. If we increase the volume inside the chest cavity, so the pressure inside the chest cavity will decrease. Now, it's going to work like a straw, right? Inside the chest cavity, we have low pressure. Outside the chest cavity, we have high pressure. As a result, the air is sucked in from outside into the inside of the lungs and we will breathe in. Now, as we are going to breathe out, there are two situations, okay? The two situations that we have is that I'm normally breathing out, right? Normal breathe out. The second situation is that you can also breathe out forcefully, right? If I ask you right now, breathe out and take out all of the air from your lungs. So when you breathe out and you take out all the air from your lungs, that's forceful, right? You are forcefully taking out all the lungs. Now, if you breathe out normally, you're not forcing the air out, you breathe out normally, what's going to happen? That the external intercostal muscles will relax. Over here, they contracted. over here they will relax. What's going to happen? That there is nothing holding the rib cage up anymore. Okay? So the rib cage is going to fall under gravity because the muscles have relaxed. Nothing holding the rib cage up anymore. It's going to fall down. The rib cage is going to move in and down. The rib cage is going to move in and down. The diaphragm is also going to relax and become dome shaped. This will decrease the volume inside the chest cavity, pleural cavity. When the volume of the pleural cavity is going to decrease, so it's like, you have reduced the size of the gas cylinder. The pressure will increase. So the pressure inside the chest cavity increases. And as a result, the air moves from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Now, if you breathe out forcefully, the same thing happens. When you breathe out forcefully, the same thing happens. The only difference is that the internal intercostal muscle will contract. In normal exhalation, there will be no contraction. Okay? The external intercostal muscles will relax. That's it. The internal ones won't do anything. Just the external ones will relax. The ones on the outside, they will just relax. There will be no contraction. But if you want to breathe out forcefully, so the internal muscles will now also contract and they will pull the rib cage further in. So you can force more of the air out of your lungs. Okay, so in normal exhalation, just external muscles relax. That's it. But forceful exhalation, now the external muscles are relaxing, but the internal muscles will also contract to further bring the rib cage inside so that more volume will decrease and more air will move out of the lungs. That is forceful exhalation, right? So this is how we inhale and this is how we are actually going to be exhaling. Is this making sense? Any confusion regarding any of this?
No.
Okay. All right. So we will go ahead and we will basically stop it over here for today. Now we are almost done with our, not almost done with our topic. We are done with talking about how the lungs actually work. Now, in the next class, we will study about lung diseases. That is the most important part of the topic, this topic, the diseases of the lungs. So, we're going to go ahead and take a look at lung diseases in the next class. All right?
Okay.